Everything going with yourself?
Oh, I'm doing well, doing well. So we are BizWiz, although we're thinking of a different name, right? And today we're going to talk about. My name is Kyle. We're going to talk about: do you build a business? Do you buy a business, or do you franchise? What do you think?
Hey, everyone out there, let me give a little intro for myself. My name is Jake, and I am the CEO and founder of a fintech business. And my friend Kyle and here are on just about our fifth episode of doing a business style
Hmm.
podcast in the Reddit space because we're interested in the Reddit subreddits like startup, entrepreneur, fintech, entrepreneur ride along. And we're hoping to connect with some of the people out in that space. And today, Kyle would like to talk about build it,
Buy it, franchise it.
build it, buy it, or franchise it. What's your preference, sir? Should we start out with you?
Well, sure. I've done all three, and
Have you done all
they've all
three? So you've built it, you've bought a business, and you've franchised a business.
yeah, yeah, and they've all got their pros and cons. I could speak, I think, from a well, let's start. I'd like to hear about your experience with the build part. Why don't we start with that? Because that's pretty common. A lot of people, when they think of entrepreneurship, they think of starting something up from scratch, having an innovative idea, disrupting the market in some way, and you build it yourself, right? Because it isn't there
Well,
before.
let me take a slightly different approach to that because I kind of came into this entrepreneur thing later in life, and I wish I'd kind of run into it sooner. Whether
Define
whether it is
later.
whether it is build it or buy it or franchise it, I wish I'd tried entrepreneurship earlier because working out in that corporate world wasn't really for me. You can get really beat up out there, and you put in 60 or 80 hours a week. You're trying to like work your way up in a company, and you're killing yourself for a
Hmm.
paycheck. And really, at the end of the day, it's the company that's making all the big money and has the good parking spot.
Yeah,
And it wasn't until later in life I had enough motivation to really get out there and try to do the entrepreneur thing. But I think it's great. I've really enjoyed it. And for me personally, I'm in a fintech space, and so there was not an option to buy or franchise, and so build it was the only kind of opportunity for me on this side.
yeah, that makes sense, especially in industries that are young and growing like fintech. Building is the way to go. Creating something that wasn't there before.
That is
Define
that is
later
the
in life.
opportunity.
When you say you got into entrepreneurship, what does that mean to you? Like, how long were you in the workforce before you decided to start your own business?
Longer than I'd like to admit, Kyle. But I think when I was young, I did have friends that looked into the Subway franchises. I had a friend who was obsessed with it when I was younger, and I as someone who's been a sandwich artist, I've worked there. I know what that side of the business is like. But I have known a few owners in that space, and it can be a grind, except for some people that really have a knack for it, and I think build up and get a few stores.
Yeah,
Um, but for me, no, I always worked for other companies, and it wasn't until later in life that I'd like to go out. And now that I've been an entrepreneur, I don't know how I could ever go back and work for like a big company.
it's funny that you say that. I hear that a lot from people, and at the same time, it's that taking that step into entrepreneurship is really there's a lot of trepidation involved in it, and I think that the decision to whether you're going to build, buy, or franchise might have something to do with like what stage in life do you decide to take the leap into business ownership, and what is your risk tolerance profile? Because they all have their quirks about what risk is like. Um,
I think the build aspect gets much more difficult if you're in a family way, or if you have young children.
mhm.
It definitely gets more intimidating not having a regular check and the health insurance and things of that nature that come with having a more comfortable position where you're working for someone else. And that in fact is being an entrepreneur and running a business is one of the things you can offer to your employees, right? Like we put in a structure, we have a product, we have a company, we pay the taxes, we do some of that hard work and heavy lifting, and you get to show up and do a job, and at the end of the day go home and potentially have a little more of a disconnect.
That is compelling. It was funny you mentioned that. I was over at a store shopping, And on the way out, I ran into, there was a guy leaving the store right behind me. I looked back and I recognized him. He was one of my old employees from the first company I started, and I hadn't seen him in about 20 years. I'm
Wow,
dating
that's
myself.
awesome.
And then, and we were laughing because, he's still in the high tech startup space, but we were laughing that it had been 20 years ago that we were starting this scrappy little software tech company and hadn't seen each other in that long. So it was great to catch up. But he was a high quality dude, and I was very blessed with having some really great employees. But one of the ways that I was able to keep them and build that company was to offer those things that you just mentioned. Is not just because you're starting a business doesn't mean that everybody that's working for you wants to have that startup feel that you're going after, right? So providing some stability is nice, but ultimately you'd like to do it for yourself too. And when you build something, you're right. It's a double-edged sword. You get to create everything, but also you have to create everything, right? So you might spend all day running a business and all night building the
As someone
systems
as
around it.
someone who's a solopreneur, and like your email goes down or there's a problem with your website, it it's not that hard until you have to spend hours on it when you need to be doing something else. And so
Yeah,
those little niggly things when you don't have a tech department, and an IT team, and some of the benefits of working for a company, right? You got to do it yourself. It can be very frustrating.
yeah. And it's, granted, it's got easier if you're in the tech space than it used to be. I wish
There's
that
a
we
lot
had
more.
had,
There's a lot more options for outsourcing, and I would argue, and
yeah.
I'm interested in your opinion on this, particularly as someone who's been an entrepreneur and a franchisor for 20 years. But do you think it's easier to start a business today than it has been in the past?
I think so. And I consider that, like, hey, let's look at the tech space, for example. Um, there's so much that you can do that's cloud based or software as a service that can take care of all those little problems that you run into every day. I noticed, for example, like when I started 20 years ago, there wasn't Amazon Web Services or a lot of cloud based things. So I actually built a full rack, filled it up with Dell computers, and that was our infrastructure, right? And that's expensive, right? And so not only for small entrepreneurs, for big businesses, and we've seen some economies of scale that just make that stuff really easy now. um,
I mean, that comes back a little bit to my world, right? Like there's some really interesting companies solving HR and solving business insurance for your employees in ways that you haven't had access to before. So I
yeah,
would argue that with technology, things are getting easier.
yeah, I think so. But you still need to build the systems, and it's still about people, it's still about products, it's still about customers, and all of that stuff is hard, right? And the classic case of, like, what does the CEO or founder spend their time on is just as difficult as ever, and I think always will be. And that's I'm sure you're feeling it, the tug of multiple priorities and so only so much time in the day. So to the extent you can get good at that, that helps your success a lot. And
Can you speak to some of the, because you've done a variety of things? Can you speak to some of the things you've built versus some of the franchises you've got involved in?
yeah, well, I think that here's a classic case. So I did a managed IT services provider. So what that is essentially is providing IT support for small medium business market. Basically 10 to 500 employees. Um, that's inherently kind of difficult. But if the franchisor basically brings, the third level, the first level support contact center, first and second level, and they work as a cost of goods sold, it just relieves so much of the problem. And you can focus on, as the owner, what's really important, which is uh, being an account executive, being account management, providing third level support techs, and great customer service, and managing a team. So you don't get all bogged down in some of the nitty gritty details because the franchisor runs interference for you. And that's just one example. And there's many that are like that, that even in the one that I'm running now is, the contractual things that they run interference on for me is amazing. I'll pay that royalty all day long.
So
It's,
what if you
yeah,
what if you started from scratch tomorrow, clean slate? for whatever reason,
Ooh.
this business sells or is gone for whatever reason. What do you do tomorrow?
Man,
Build, buy, or franchise? And within that, what would you build or what would you franchise?
I would franchise. Just because I think it's good doesn't mean that it's good for everybody. But when answering that question, I take into account what I think everybody should, which is, what do you want your life to be like? How much time do you want to put into it? What kind of lifestyle do you want to lead in terms of, what are your financial goals and all that? And I'd probably do a multi-unit franchise that can be run semi-absentee with managers in place over time.
What does that
Uh,
mean? A semi multi-unit? What's multi-unit? Sorry.
it quite simply, it's you own the rights to multiple locations of a concept.
Of
Um,
one type of business.
One type of business, but you're in all different locations around town. I don't really feel like traveling for work, so I want to be home for dinner. And I like the whole franchise concept that, room a manager, then you can go part time in that business. And to me, that sounds like a really good retirement track where I have an income stream, I own an asset and it's growing and I have something to do, but it's not running my life, I'm working at it
That's
10,
that's
15
what I
hours a
that's
week.
what I always like about you, Kyle. Kyle, you like your businesses to work for you, not the other way around. And I think that's a
Yeah,
good approach.
I think it is, and that's tough to get to when you're in the build mode, right? Because it is all about you. And there's so much of your energy that drives that business forward that it's hard to treat it dispassionately. You can't back off that easily, at least not on.
I think it's an important point whether you are a franchise build or working for someone else, right? Like you want your business or your investment to work for you. And just because you're building it doesn't guarantee that will happen. Just because you do a franchise doesn't mean that'll happen. And I think there's some people who aren't great at running a franchise who end up they work for their business rather than it kind of working for them.
Yeah, it's true. And you know what it is? I think, and this is true of many businesses. If you're the kind of person that says, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself, you're going to have a bad time in business because it's all about delegation, right? I mean,
Right.
just think if you had to do
Right.
every single thing, Jake,
I see what you're
you would never
saying.
sleep.
Yeah.
And so those folks that just can't trust another person to do a job that they've
That's
delegated, they're
that's
going
really
to have a bad.
counterintuitive. That's really counterintuitive. I would have thought like if you can't do something if you, yeah, if you're the kind of personality that thinks if someone else can't do it right, you should just do it yourself. You'd think that would be a good fit for someone to start their own business or a franchise, but you're right. If they can't delegate, they've got a
Can't
real problem
delegate.
there.
Yeah. And I think that, modern culture has made it easy to delegate lots of little tasks like payroll and insurance, let the brokers deal with it. And, all that stuff that business owners need around them. It's easy to delegate that. But the
But
core
it's
operations of
still
your
a lot of
business,
work, right? Like you have to research
yeah,
those companies, you have to build something out to work with them. You've got to be of a certain size to take advantage of some of that kind of HR and payroll support. It's not going to work for very small companies with one, two, or three people. Um,
yeah,
but for bigger than that, I think there's a lot of interesting technology out there that's coming to the space, just the business entrepreneur space. I would put an argument forth that it's probably one of the easiest times to start a business now than ever before.
yeah, I agree with you. Why do you say that?
I think well one because everyone's talking all the time about how his money is cheaper than it's ever been before, right? And there's so much of it out
Yeah,
there, and that's not going to last forever. But also just with all the technical innovations that are out there and Fiverr, like if you're in a pinch and need something done on a web page, like before you had to search the internet and find someone and maybe buy them for a job, and now you can access good support through Fiverr or Upwork. You've got Up Counsel. You need a little legal services for your business.
yeah,
Um, there's so much at your fingertips now with these kind of fractional gig workers.
yep,
And I actually, interestingly, I see that as one of the biggest opportunity for people in the near term. Apparently, gig workers in America is something like 35%, and it's only going upwards. And so
interesting.
you have this concept that's a little bit of a side of what you propose, where you're now an independent worker that works for other people.
Yeah,
A little bit like Uber, but it can be for just about anything. I think you can
a
you can do
freelancer.
Fiverr, but I think there's also sales positions now you can get fractionally on a platform.
you're kind of delving into this topic of the cash flow quadrant. Have you ever looked at that before?
No, but I'm intrigued. Tell us.
It defines our relationship with money. If you can imagine, and you can do your own research on cash flow quadrant. But what you're talking about is, basically there's employees, self-employed, business owners, and investors. Those are the four ways that you interact with the economy using your time and your money. What you're talking about is self-employed people. They're no longer employed full-time. They're self-employed. They're doing a thing, but there's a limit. That's not scalable business growth because there's only so many hours in the day you can hire out, right? And so the employees and the self-employed are not scalable, but the business owners and the investors are scalable because they're employing teams and they're employing capital. And that's
Well,
the
we're
topic
we're
for
at
another
we're at
day.
an interesting. You've laid that out very nicely, but we're at an interesting point where there's a little bit of an inflection going on, right? Because of inflation, and you have, what did they call it last year when a lot of people left their jobs? There was like a
The
wave
great
of
resignation.
yeah, there was the wave of resignation, and so people have this opportunity to go work for themselves and work from home. They've got Zoom, they've got things like OBS Stream, and you can do some powerful things from home now. So there's maybe a little bit more of an opportunity to go work for yourself without starting a business than there was before.
Yeah, there is. And I think that it represents a really great opportunity to get a taste for what it's like to do entrepreneurship, to build something. But if you really want to build it bigger than you got to have employees and lots of them, right?
Yeah, and I do wonder, like, even though there's a lot of comfort by working from home and working in some kind of gig economy, um, I'm struggling to see how that could build true wealth like some of the other options you discussed, maybe, kid.
How to build true wealth? Yeah, it's a struggle. I mean, you're constrained by the number of people that you have working for you and the margin you get off of each, right? Kind of like a law
But I
firm.
think there's more opportunity for true wealth in building your own business or in going for a franchise over working for someone else or in the gig economy is my thought,
It,
but I'm interested in what you think.
I absolutely. I think that when you're building something that's scalable, like what you're doing with BizFi, has the opportunity to be massively scalable, and that's the allure of the tech company. Same thing with a franchise. It's, you can build through replication. You get one up and running, you realize that, yeah, I can do this, and you just start cranking out ones. I'll give you a good example. I got a guy, he set a goal for himself. He knew that in order to reach that goal, he had to have seven locations, right? So that's probably what he's going to do. Is he's just going to start with one and build until he gets to seven and put
So
managers in
he
place
did all
and
the
whatever.
math and he benchmarked a certain lifestyle that he wanted and a certain income. And he did all the
Absolutely.
math that, like, you could have this much profit with one store and this much profit with two. And
Yes.
you must get a benefit from the franchisors, like buying power, right? If you have seven stores, you're buying more of a
Yeah.
product, and so do you get like a purchasing kind of buying power?
Yeah, you do. But I think even on the front end, on the investment side, there's a benefit to doing multiples, because think of it from a franchisor's perspective. If they, for a given market, they would much rather support one person that's got multiple stores than seven different people that have all got one, right? And so for those who have the multi-unit empire in mind, they offer steep discounts on the investment,
Up
to
front, if you
upfront.
indicate you want to be a multi tenant, multi
Yep.
unit over single unit,
Yep.
you're already getting some advantages.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the advantages is adds up to tens of thousands of dollars off the investment, if you do a multi, because it's easier for them to support you, and they pass those savings in part on to the investor.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of neat. But it isn't the same as like BizFi, where you're looking at a nationwide or potentially worldwide market. I think that franchising is inherently a community based type of organization. Like there's only so far that somebody's going to drive to your store.
Yeah, it's
But
interesting.
yours is, I think, more
There's
scalable, which attracts venture capital, I think.
there's two companies in my space. One's an independent financial institution. They like to have like local offices. So they've opened up like 5 or 6 offices across the nation so that people can have some kind of a connection to the people that sell to them, right? They're regional, they could go out and meet them. So they've liked
Yeah.
that structure. And then Lendio actually has a franchise.
Interesting.
Are you
I've
familiar? Are
heard
you
of
familiar
that.
with
Yes,
the
I've
Lendio
heard of that.
franchise?
I worked
Yeah.
with a client who was looking at something like that before. I don't think they ultimately went in that direction, but and I realized, why does that work? Why does the business financing space work? Because ultimately it's really relationship based, and that's hard to
Yes.
scale. That's really hard to scale. And so when you have that relationship base in a B2B, which is core to the success of a concept, that's when franchising can be useful. Makes sense.
Yes.
Was
Well,
that something that you thought about doing in the end, or?
I'm interested to kind of almost fractionalize or like, DeFi is a word that's thrown around um, a little bit too much, right? Decentralized finance, they use it in cryptocurrency, people that talk about crypto and the
Yep.
decentralization of the base. And we're actually looking to do a little something like that. So you're saying that equipment finance tends to be relationships based, but we are trying to make a technology that makes offering equipment finance easier. And so we want
Hmm.
to partner with people that sell it, but I'm also intrigued to see if we couldn't tap into more of a gig economy of people that support us or help to sell the product because we make it easy enough for anyone to sell it. Whereas
Yeah.
currently you can't really sell equipment finance or like, be a mortgage lender broker unless you have to be in the business a number of years. You've got to
Yeah,
take
you
your lumps
do.
and you lose deals because you miss small things and you learn along the way. And, we're hoping that we could put some of that knowledge into the system so that anyone could sell it. That's what we'd like to achieve.
Well, when you've got something that's so well systematized like that, and you can take somebody and give them an operations manual and train them and go out and do it, that's when you got the good bones for being a franchisor as a concept. And you
Well, our
vertically
our thought
integrate that.
is, and we touched on that once before, but our thought is could we get that what did you call it? The service level, the instructions?
Oh, the operations manual.
Instead of an operations manual or instructions, we're trying to get that into the system. Can the system kind of be the trainer and push people along? Like, this is your next step. This is what you have to do, rather than having a book or a manager do it. Can we have a technology that kind of guides people through a process? So that's something we're interested to do, but it is something we still have to prove if we can make that happen.
Yeah, I think that you can use a lot of tech to make things work. Although ultimately, the thing that is going to attract people is, in the end, it's people running this, right? And we need support. We need emotional support. It's scary to do this. You've been brave to build this thing, and in order to get people to line up behind you and your banner, they want to know that you're making them feel supported in the venture, and it takes the sting of entrepreneurship away. And kind of going back to build, buy, or franchise. I mean, this is ultimately, which way you go depends on how much sting you want to remove from business ownership. And each one has its benefits, I think.
Yeah,
Um, so, but yeah, I mean, you could do that even with your business if you wanted to.
that
Buying a
is a little
business.
that is a little more longer term thinking than where we're at today, but it's very very intriguing.
Yes, very intriguing. Yeah, fodder for another time. Never really did talk about buying a business. Have you ever considered doing that, something like that, before, like earlier in your career, or?
I never really did look into buying a business. It takes a lot of capital. I know for a while there was I didn't. It was kind of hot for a while to do like some kind of like reverse leverage buyout, where like you take the business assets to be able to get a bank loan to be able to buy out a business. But it takes a lot of capital to buy a business, so I'd never really seriously considered it. And then finally got
Yeah.
motivated later in life uh to start a business and try to build something. But buying a business is challenging. I think you need a lot of money first, or some real substance to be able to go out and get a bank loan to do something like that. Whereas I
Yeah,
think the franchise is a little easier and more accessible.
it is. It is. It doesn't take nearly as much capital to start a franchise, and
Kyle, we
that's really where.
we have about 5 minutes running up here, and
Well,
guys, again,
yeah.
this is just a business chat on Reddit. We're looking to tap into people, and we're also live streaming to LinkedIn at the same time. Interested to reach out to people who are interested in business on Reddit, who are in some of the subreddits like co-founder and startup and entrepreneur ride along. Any questions you do have for us, we're happy to take them. And Kyle, what are the franchises that are hot at the moment? What are people interested in?
Dogs. Anything having to do with dogs.
Oh, like
Um,
the mobile units that do the
it could be that.
mobile
It could
grooming.
be pet sitting. It could be concierge grooming. It could be stay and play, boarding. Anything having to do with dogs. People love their dogs.
I can
Um,
imagine, because one thing I noticed is through coronavirus, everyone got a dog.
yeah, yeah.
Everyone, my neighborhood is inundated with dogs and people walking dogs because everyone got lonely or was from home. We actually got a second dog in coronavirus for the kids, and so our other dog would have something to play with. And so
Nice.
everywhere you look, there's tons of dogs. So that must be like a growing economy.
It is. You've heard the term fur babies.
Yep.
That implies that people will spend on their pets, and that's good business. So I'm seeing that a lot of home consumer service businesses too. So, I do work with people who are like, we've been through this pandemic, we're coming out of it. It's, a recession might come. I want recession resilient businesses. That's what people want, is they want to be able to make money, good times and bad. So those tend to be durable. Anything home consumer service, automotive, um, health, beauty, fitness, senior care, children's education, those are all strong too. Yeah. Well, we're coming to the end pretty much. I wanted to say hi to everybody that was on LinkedIn and really appreciate you joining us today. That we are out here every Wednesday afternoon talking about business, talking about startups. Jake's doing a startup in the fintech space, and I've been helping people get into franchises. And I think that we come from different backgrounds, looking at this common idea of entrepreneurship to give it a little bit more depth and character to the idea. And we appreciate your input, feedback, and attention.
And we are thinking about changing the name of the podcast. Someone recommended BizWiz, and we ran with that our first few episodes. We're thinking about coming up with a new name. Any suggestions out there, feel free to throw one into comments. And Kyle, always a pleasure to speak with you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to speaking to you next week at 12 Eastern, 11
Absolutely.
CST.
That's right. That's right. We'll see you next time, Jake.
You have a wonderful afternoon, everyone out there. We look forward to speaking to you soon.
Y'all have a good one. Bye bye.